And as a reminder for everyone, this is being live streamed and also will be available on YouTube. You can give me a thumbs up in the back if we're good to go. All right, great. Kicking off the Government Review Commission meeting today on March 10th. Welcome everybody. Let's kick it off with the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we'll start this way. Matt, can you kick us off for roll call, please?
Matt Barron.
Rohit Acharya.
Willie McCain.
Rob Vecchio.
Okay. Now I'll just restate the purpose of the Government Review Commission. The commission shall study the charter and county government, including the organization, practices, and responsibilities of all county departments and agencies. The commission shall evaluate the effectiveness, efficiency, and equity of county government and charter, and may make recommendations to the people of the county related to county government, as well as related amendments to the charter. While the purview of the Government Review Commission is broad, its authority is strictly advisory, and its recommendations are not binding upon the county. The commission shall submit a final report to the people of the county on the commission's findings and recommendations. With that, Ernest, do we have any public comment on the agenda items?
Public comment on agenda items.
All right, moving along. Now we'll approve minutes from the last meeting. Do we have any changes or a motion to approve?
Motion approved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, those are approved. So we are expedient, and so we will move to our first discussion on Pennsylvania's property reassessment system. I'd like to welcome Senator Fontana to the podium, I guess to the to the chair, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for coming to the commission, Senator.
My pleasure. Try that. There we go.
Red is on. Threw me off. I think it's still morning, so good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and it's certainly great to talk about this subject, at least for me, not for everyone else out there, I assume, for what I've been finding out over the years. But thank you very much for the invitation to speak to this commission about a topic I have worked on since I sat in this very room as a member of the first Allegheny County Council. I'm a realtor by trade, and having lived through the Allegheny County 2000 Sabre Systems property reassessment, I knew that only doing countywide reassessments when ordered by the court was a major problem. So as chair back then of the council's assessment committee, I drafted a bill to conduct scheduled reassessments. However, unfortunately, that bill was vetoed back in, I think, 2003, if I recall. And over 20 years later, we face the same exact problem. But Allegheny County is not alone. Counties across the Commonwealth are saddled with decades-old property value data. In fact, 54 of our 67 counties have not reassessed in 15 years or more, including 10 counties who have not completed an assessment in more than 48 years. Pennsylvania is the only state in the nation with a base year property assessment system that does not reassess on a standard schedule. I've learned that fact when I began meeting with experts and stakeholders to craft what has become Senate Bill 567. That's the first bill introduced in the General Assembly to require every county to conduct a reassessment once every 5 years. In July of 2024, right here in this gold room, I hosted the first of 2 Senate Policy Committee hearings on the issue. The other one was in Harrisburg. The committee heard testimony on the effect the Commonwealth's dysfunctional reassessment system is having on municipalities, school districts, and real estate in Allegheny County. We heard from the County Board of Property Assessment Appeals about how people are paying thousands of dollars more in taxes than they should because our system is not uniform. We heard from a school superintendent about how school boards have no choice but to raise taxes because of the havoc the assessment appeals process can have on budgets. And I heard from a realtor about how our inequitable and unfair system leads to inconsistencies, like 2 identical houses on the same street being taxed on 2 different property values. And that happens a lot. Finally, we heard from a national commercial real estate expert about how Pennsylvania loses out on potential buyers and developers because of our inability to budget property taxes accurately or on a consistent basis. So if not reassessing, if it is so bad, why aren't we doing it? First and foremost, it's the lack of political will. No politician wants to vote for something that could be interpreted as raising people's taxes. However, the facts are that the industry standard outcome of reassessments across the country is that 1/3 of people's assessed values will go up, 1/3 will go down, and 1/3 will stay the same. In addition, Pennsylvania's Act 1 prohibits a taxing body from bringing in more revenue as a result of a reassessment. Put another way, if a county's reassessment results in additional tax money, the county must lower the tax rate. That's the millage. But despite these facts, it's difficult for elected officials to vote for reassessing. Another reason is the cost. Reassessment costs money, and the longer it's been since the last one, the more expensive it is. Reassessments done on a standard cycle can cost between $10 and $20 per parcel, but reassessments done in counties that have not reassessed in decades can run as high as $60 to $70 per parcel. That drastic increase is why the first reassessment done after a long time is important, but the more important one is the next scheduled one. If a county reassesses after years of not doing it, that's great, but what brings down the cost? What does bring the costs down? What makes the system fair for taxpayers? What takes the political risk away is doing it again and again and again until a reassessment is not scary or expensive or overdue and certainly expected. That's why I introduced Senate Bill 567. Senate Bill 567 does the following. It requires that all counties other than Philadelphia must reassess at least once every 5 years with biannual market value adjustments. My bill moves the State Tax Equalization Board, we call it STEB for short, to the State Department of Revenue and gives it real power. Currently, STEB operates as little more than as a collector of assessment data, a calculator of the common level ratio, and has no authority to enforce reassessment laws. My bill provides STEB with the power to enforce the law, to certify assessed values, and to hear counties' appeals. The bill requires the Department of Revenue to develop and publish a schedule of county assessments with 10 and 15 counties to certify assessment rules each year. It will protect counties in compliance with the law from lawsuits challenging uniformity, like the ones Allegheny County has to deal with. It limits spot appeals of the school district, which happens all the time, allows counties to collect the annual $20 per parcel fee to fund reassessments, try to help with the cost. The bill is currently in the Senate State Government Committee awaiting consideration. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak before you, the commission here. I'm looking forward to your recommendations as we go forward. Keep in mind, this is a bill that can be amended. I wrote it at the beginning of this session. The session actually expires at the end of this year, and if anything doesn't run, we have to reintroduce it. I'm happy to work with all of you and others to make tweaks or changes to it if necessary, but I'm happy to have your input and certainly any questions right now. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Rob?
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. One of my questions is dealing more with the 5 years. How did you settle on the 5 years versus like a 4 or 3 years?
Yeah, I think initially I said 3. Actually, I would have preferred 3, but after having the hearings that I spoke of, both here and in Harrisburg, the consensus sort of fell on 5 years. But during that time, there still can be updates. You can have, data coming in. If you see a big spike or not, we can adjust it. They can adjust it that way. So just, and again, it's probably a cost thing too.
More of a cost thing, okay. One of the things we're trying to determine as a commission is how do we provide realistic recommendations to county council and the county executive on a path for here in Allegheny County. Anything you would recommend or help us out as we're going through this? I know this is a very, as we know, political issue here and everywhere else. So again, we want to come up with realistic recommendations and not just have something that's just going to sit on a shelf.
I think, if you're making recommendations, that's good. It'd be nice to have an advocacy, plan to go to the state. And because if I'm trying to help folks like myself in the Senate and House not to have to necessarily put up a vote to say do a reassessment. If we give the authority to STEB to do it, and then STEB does it, it sort of takes it away, from us, and then we have to deal with the cost. That advocacy, I think, is important. I've had all those folks, especially in Harrisburg, testify, but none of them really wants to, step up and say, let's do it. CCAP kind of pushed back because of cost, because at that moment when we had the hearing, we really didn't talk about that. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Every other state does it. Every other state has put up a vote. Every other state has figured it out and done it's the right thing to do. There's no question about it. Everyone says that, but just we can't get them to make the vote. So the advocacy of groups like yourselves would be very helpful. And I'm sure the county executive and every county executive throughout Pennsylvania would rather see a statewide reassessment than have to do it on their own and have to do it, court ordered in most cases. It'd be nice if the court did it, but they're not willing to do it either. But that was then. I'm not sure about now. So you got to push it forward and see where the chips fall, I would say.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Senator, for your leadership. I know you've been championing this for years when I came on to the county, and it makes so much sense. I really appreciate you continuing to challenge us to do it. And we've had a lot of internal discussions here. This is probably our third subject on it. And cost does come up a lot. We were thinking, as we sit here today, unlike the last time we did it, with technology advances and comparing, like you said, every other state does it, there has to be lessons learned to help mitigate that. Do you hear that too during your conversation?
Yeah, it's the first one, right? I mean, back when Sabre System, we got elected in '99, the reassessment was taking place. I went to visit Sabre System and I held my head because you can't get down a street in the city and say they're all the same. 100-year-old houses because they've updated inside. If you're not getting inside, you're in big trouble. So they had maybe 100,000 appeals right after that back then. But the first one's the cost, so we have to figure out a way to do that. After that, even technology today, as a realtor, I can go down, I'll get a call, list my house, not anymore, I used to, list my house, you do comparables. But you can't get in every house to do it, but you come up with an average price. You can continue to do that, and if you keep updating it through technology, even year to year, every 5 years, the big one, in between, you keep updating. You figure out a way to do that. That's what I'm saying about the tweaks and some of the things we can do with the legislation. But that would be up to STEB. And again, that's what they're doing in other states. They figured it out. Right. And I think back in 2000 or 2003, when I was here, there was only 2 states in the country that did scheduled statewide reassessments back then.
Wow.
Michigan, it rings a bell, is one of them.
Right.
And I was trying to pattern after that, but we were just talking about Allegheny County back then.
Right.
But Now we're the only one in the nation that doesn't do it.
Well, thanks again. I really appreciate your hard work and continuing to push this. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? No?
Morning,
Yes,
Senator.
please.
Thank you. It sounds like you have kind of been steadfastly at this for quite some time, and I think we all here kind of appreciate those efforts. I'm curious as to what you think the timeline is. I feel like we're kind of operating on parallel tracks here. So this board is trying to think of what recommendations we should make for the county, while you're trying to move something forward that would affect statewide and then would probably make any recommendations that we make potentially obsolete. So I'm curious as to where you think you are on the track and what you think kind of the odds are of getting something over the finish line.
Well, first of all, in my opinion, it's not fair for Allegheny County to have to do one and the counties around them not to do one, right? I just think, and that goes for every other county that's not done, because people, I mean, how many times as a road I've heard people, I'm moving to Peters Township. I'm getting out of Allegheny County. Same with the businesses. Why should they come here if they're not consistent about what the, what the property tax is? So that's number one. Secondly, as far as timeline, again, if I don't have the advocacy, I started this in the state level back in January, a year and a half ago, and we only have a half a year, then I have to reintroduce it. So without the advocacy, without people pushing, groups like yourself, not just here in Allegheny County, but throughout the state, I don't know what the timeline. If you look at the bill I passed out, I think there's four.
I don't think we have.
You may have missed it. There might be 4 or 5 co-sponsors is all there is.
Yeah.
So, there's 50 of us in the Senate. Everyone's afraid to sign on.
Thank you.
Everyone's afraid to sign on, even as co-sponsors. So that's not good, obviously. But I can tell you, when I'm having lunch in the lunchroom or wherever I'm at, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican will walk in and go, "You're doing the right thing." But they won't sign on. But they won't sign on, I mean, this is what I'm going through, because they're afraid that they'll get tagged in their next election as wanting to raise prices. I can tell you, when I ran for the Senate, for county council, the first flyer went out is Fontana wants to raise your property taxes, because I had proposed that bill when I was on county council. That was the first flyer that went out against me. So that's the perception, but it isn't always, obviously it's not the reality. Some will go up. The ones that are not paying their fair share are going to go up, but the others are overpaying and they're going to go down. So that's the fairness and the equitableness of it. The consistency matters, obviously, for people moving in and out, businesses moving in and out. I keep preaching that, but I can't turn around and there's nobody there. I need some help, without a doubt.
Where do you find that advocacy? I mean, where?
It should be through all the groups out there that I mentioned, the school districts, everybody at the municipalities, because they all should be. You should want that consistency. Do you want to deal with the common level ratio every year, whether, going up or down, or smart assessments? That eliminates all that. If we have such consistent, scheduled reassessments, people will wait for that. But you can do adjustments in between through technology. There's no doubt about it. So it's not fair to have one county doing it and another one not doing it. It just isn't the right thing to do. So we have an opportunity, being the only state in the nation that doesn't do it on a scheduled statewide schedule. Then everybody should, in my opinion, everybody should be advocating for it, just out of fairness and consistency. Evan, good to see you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate
You're
your
welcome.
time.
Senator, have there been any prior bills that haven't made it out of committee and are used in committee right now?
Yeah, I was the first one. No one would write it. I'm the first one to write it.
That's what I wanted to check.
Yeah, nobody wants to write that. I've been there a while, so I'm willing to take the hits. And I got to tell you, after the hearing here in Allegheny County, and even up there, because we got some publicity on it, 95% of emails I got were positive. Yes, you're doing the right thing. I'm talking about from property owners. Somebody from Berks County gave me some stuff, because they're way under assessed, and they think, they're going to pay more, and chances are they may not. And by the way, in the bill, you can do, I'm sure you're thinking about it here, or you do a homestead exemption. You do something to help those fixed income seniors that have been there in their home for so long. When I was on the county council, councilman at that time, Fitzgerald, and I wrote that bill for the homestead exemption here in Allegheny County. You want to give people a break. You want to make sure they're not getting taxed out of their home. You want to make sure they can do the repairs and not have to overpay on taxes and other things. So, you got to take all that into consideration. So, and they have in other counties and other states. So, it's a matter of everyone coming together and pushing it, in the same direction. So.
Senator, thank you so much for coming today. Your wealth of knowledge is unsurpassed. And mostly what my colleagues had mentioned, their questions were the same as mine: cost and technology and concurrent tracks and timing and things like that. So thank you for your courage on this subject. I think we're going to need a lot more of it on this subject going forward. That might be at the top of our recommendation on this subject, courage to make this commitment, make this change for the good of the county, and look forward to advocating for your bill from our group. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. The governor's office needs to hear it from around the state. That would be helpful, because I've talked to them, and they're saying, well, we're not hearing from everybody. He's in the same position, right? He's running for office. Does he want to, so he needs that groundswell in order to convince him it's the right thing to do. So you can't be afraid to reach out to him or to his administration and say, yeah, we would like this to happen.
Right. Ultimately, if you do the right thing, and you have the courage to do the right thing, you end up being at the top of the heap in terms of the leadership. So I think we need to reiterate that with our elected officials. So, but thank you for your service for all these 25, 30 years and your background and expertise. And we'll probably be calling on you for some other subjects as well because of that. So
Thank you.
thanks a lot, Senator.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. You're almost done with the gauntlet here, so should wrap up soon. What's interesting about this whole process is that as I've gone through it, I've learned that assessments is different from taxing bodies. I think that's something that is conflated a lot, is that the assessment is determining the value that is then the taxing bodies afterwards determine what they should tax upon.
The millage.
So any conversation that is taking place that conflates the two is actually, it's upon us to advocate that they are actually separate processes. And so I appreciate
You're right.
the things that,
They don't understand the difference between the assessment and the millage.
Right.
It's assessment times millage that equals the tax. People, it's always the assessment. They blame the assessment if their taxes go up, even though millage might go up by a school district or whatever. Every taxing body should be held accountable for the tax. And they're not. They're blaming the county or whoever because of the assessment or lack of the assessment. It's just so confused. That's why you have to get the consistency, and everyone has to be on the same page.
I agree. It's to determine, the resident should determine whether they're getting the services that they are paying
Right,
for.
exactly.
And that's up to the taxing body. I just had a question about your bill. Do you have any recommendations between commercial and residential real estate? Same exact processes for both?
Yeah, and that's something that could be talked about when you're talking about commercial. You can, back when I first came to county council, we had a different millage on land and a different millage on building. We combined that because we thought it would be easier to figure it all out back then after the reassessment. Some people think maybe that should be separated out again too, land and building. You're one of them, okay. So, and there's a good argument for that, but it's same with commercial and residential, and you can draw a line there. But right now, the way it is, it's the same. Yeah, but we didn't get into the separation of land and building.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator Fontana, great to see here, and thank you for sharing with this commission here. And I didn't catch the very beginning, but I definitely got the gist of where you're heading and the importance of the statewide effort that you're recommending. As you think about what's necessary, what's needed to be able to get the whole state on board, Any recommendations in terms of, obviously here in Allegheny County, we have a commission here that could make a recommendation, but what about the other counties that are across the Commonwealth, and are there any particular bodies that can give voice to this issue?
I think CCAP is probably one of them. The commissioners that are, every other county. I actually went to Penn State and spoke to the treasurers. They had a conference up there. They almost had a heart attack. I mean, when I'm saying you should do a statewide, they went, it was a cost more than anything else, but they were worried about their getting voted out. So it's an education thing too, which, we're trying to do, that, 1/3 go up, not everybody goes, pays more, but also it's the right thing to do. And I think the advocacy from the groups that actually deal with this, and I've talked to our Weiss and try to get the school board to do it instead of suing you guys or the county, go up there and advocate on a state level, and they do, but they don't, it just isn't persistent enough. And it has to be, someone to get the group. The community project brought a lawsuit, and I'm not sure exactly what the status of that is. They sued the General Assembly first, and then they sued the governor. But you don't hear nothing about it. Nothing's going on with it. Nobody joined it. It'd be great to have it go to Commonwealth Court and let the court say, yeah, you should do it, because that's what's happened. By the way, that's happened in other states where the court ordered it because of discrimination or something. They come up with a legitimate excuse to do it, but the court had, the wherewithal to do it.
Right.
And wasn't worried about getting voted out as a judge. I mean, we've had plenty of court cases and the judges punt there all the time here, and that, it would be nice to have the court do it. But as it, sue, Allegheny County gets sued to have a reassessment. Other counties get sued to have a reassessment. As an individual county, how about the whole state getting sued to do a reassessment statewide? That's what the community project was trying to do, but they didn't get much support either. Everybody's afraid of making somebody mad, I guess. I don't know what it is. Right.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks, Senator. Echo my colleagues here in thanking you for your leadership. I know this is a lonely fight, but it's a really important one, so thank you.
You're welcome.
I want a rational reassessment as a homeowner in Allegheny County because I want fairness for myself and my neighbors, and frankly, I think everyone should want that.
Sure.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more. We talked about the costs of doing it, and waiting this long is going to end up costing more, but can you talk a little bit more about the costs of not doing it? Things like the newcomers tax, other issues that are, really holding the county back economically because we don't have this consistent system.
I wish I had the numbers with me, because at one time I think I had them, about the cost of not doing it. There is no question that it's costing Allegheny County, we'll just use Allegheny County, it's costing them money not to do it. Because if you do it consistently and fair, it's bringing more money in. There's no question about it, because there's so many not paying their fair share. There's no doubt. Even if you put a homestead exemption in, for the folks that need it, there's still money lost. There's no doubt, and I could probably get you the figures because we had them, and every county. And so what you try to do then is, well, if it's going to cost $40 million to do it for Allegheny, I'm throwing a number out here, to do a reassessment. Do you recoup that over time? You absolutely do. And so, but nobody wants to spend the $40 million up front, right? That's what's happening. So I come up and say, okay, $20, assess everyone $20 a parcel until you get it done. And sure, you're going to come, even the governor, maybe wants to throw a little money around to each county, $50 million bucks or something like that to help. I mean, you got to advocate for these things, but it's definitely, without a doubt, costing Allegheny County money. There's no question. Ask Dara Weiss. It's costing the school district money. It's costing everyone that sues. That's one of the reasons why. So yeah, I don't have a right number for it. I'll get it for you.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I think you're free to go. Thank you so much, Senator, for your time.
Thank you. It's great seeing all of you. Thanks for your questions.
Senator, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
All right, moving to our next presentation from Dr. Ira Goldstein from the Reinvestment Fund, talking about preparing for change, how Allegheny County's property reassessment will affect homeowners and communities.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through a presentation of some work that we did here in Allegheny County, ending a little bit over a year ago, taking a look at where it was to be expected that some of the assessments might rise and what you could do about it in terms of the impacts on homeowners around the county. That work was funded by the Heinz Endowments, and I think it was a, in some sense, a real forward-looking grant that was designed essentially to say something like this in the future is going to happen in terms of a reassessment, and how do we ensure that people are both paying their fair share and that there are things in place to make sure that people aren't so burdened by that they couldn't afford to stay in their homes, or given the history of reassessments in Allegheny County, so that you don't experience something like you experienced several decades ago. So quickly, by way of introduction, my name is Ira Goldstein. I'm with an organization in Philadelphia called Reinvestment Fund, which is a not-for-profit community development financial institution. I'm a senior advisor to the research group within that, and have been with Reinvestment Fund since June of 1999. I've had the opportunity to do some work in this tax area, several studies in the city of Philadelphia's Office of Property Assessment. And those studies were really designed to try and understand whether or not only were the assessments accurate and uniform and vertically equitable, topics that I'll come back to here in a moment, but also whether or not there were any signs that the assessments that Philadelphia was creating were treating neighborhoods fairly in terms of the racial and economic profile of those neighborhoods. That work led to me being asked to co-chair a task force for Philadelphia Mayor Parker to take a look at what it is that the city could do and what practices could be brought to the Office of Property Assessment to ensure that assessments, when they were created, were not only accurate but were fair. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. The three basic topics are: how do you create mass assessments? So we'll try and sort of do a little bit of public education on that topic. A little bit of conversation about what do we mean when we say assessments are of high quality. And then lastly, what happens during a reassessment? So what will happen to people's property taxes? Where in the county will those taxes potentially increase? And what are the ways that government can protect homeowners from the rising taxes that may ensue? And I do appreciate the comments earlier on about this separation of assessment and taxes, because they really are two very different things. The assessments really are an empirical process which should be done absent any concern really about what the tax yield is from those assessments. Those assessments are really about essentially calibrating what those taxes will yield across the county and the homeowners and actually the businesses and the like across the county. So to the extent that you can really separate those processes, you can better ensure that you have accurate and fair assessments. So those are the topics that I'm going to cover. How is it that assessors create assessments? They gather data, and they do it all year round, not just leading into assessment, but data are gathered about every single property in the jurisdiction that's to be assessed. And when I say they gather data, they're gathering property characteristic data like how big is a property, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, the kinds of things that would typically contribute to the valuation of a property. They'll get information on the quality of the house, the improvements that have been made to the house, the challenges that are with the house, as well as if a property sold, when it sold, and the circumstances of that sale. Data typically come from some municipal agency, like a recorder of deeds or a Department of Licenses and Inspection or code enforcement, places that are gathering on an ongoing basis information relevant to a property. But it's not uncommon also for folks in this world to gather data from other sources like a multiple listing service, because they have real good information about homes that sell. Or, people mention technology. Aerial imagery now is being used by some assessors, particularly to be able to sort of get a good sense as to the outside condition and whether or not there were improvements made to a property. Like, for example, a deck was placed on a property or, things of that nature that would contribute to the valuation of the property. For the homes that sell, the assessors are going to do a really careful job to try and figure out whether or not those sales are in fact real arm's length sales. And they'll do their best to figure out all the circumstances and the conditions of the property in those sales. Why? Because assessors use properties that sell to understand how value is created with properties, and then they apply that to all the other properties, right? So the properties that sell essentially, in statistical parlance, is a sample, and all properties are the universe, and you're trying to generalize from that sample to the universe. And as I said, this happens all year round. And it's not just in that, in that period leading to an assessment. And that's one of the reasons why the senator pointed out, accurately, I believe, that the longer that you wait and you're not doing all the things that you need to do, the cost rises. But if you're doing this on a regular and recurring basis, the cost is much lower. This slide, I think you have it, it's the slide with 4 boxes running across with some multiplication signs and some equal signs in there. This is a way of representing the statistics, essentially, that happens. So the statistical models are typically one form or another of a multiple regression model. And what does that mean? It means that you're trying to predict something with a set of things that you believe are predictive of that thing. So you're trying to predict the value of properties that sell, knowing about the characteristics like, again, its size, the condition, the style of the home, the geographic location of the home. Like, for example, in Philadelphia, we have not only zones, and there's about a dozen or so zones, but within that, we have very small areas that are much closer to what would sort of think about, like, what are the areas within which very similar properties are located and values are similar. And so all of those things are placed into an equation trying to predict that price. The idea is, if you end up with a really good equation, then those factors do a really good job predicting what the price of that home that sold is. There's typically an iterative process in terms of trying to figure out whether or not your equation is a good one. And by that I mean an equation that accurately predicts those prices and doesn't have any bias in those predictions. So in other words, not bias in the way we think of bias in common parlance, but statistical bias. It's going to be a little bit more, a little bit less, but not systematically one way or the other. That's what I mean by ensuring that you don't have bias. And once those equations are deemed reasonable, then essentially you will do some testing about the quality of the assessments that result, and if they're good, you apply them to all properties, and that's where your assessed values come from. But I would say the big question that always needs to be dealt with in this world, and perhaps isn't always dealt with as importantly it needs to be, is, are properties that sell the same as properties that don't sell? And I think that is one of the things that in a reassessment here that I would recommend paying a lot of attention to, because we know, for example, that when people move to sell their properties, they'll do some things to improve those, the condition of that property. And if you have a set of properties that are in some ways uniquely different than the properties that are sitting out there, particularly for people who haven't moved in recent years, then you run the risk of, having some bias in those prediction equations. And this is, I don't know if you actually have this slide. I put up an example of what an equation is from Yakima County, Washington, where they're giving you, essentially a sample regression equation where they're saying the value is a function of an intercept, which is, in this instance, probably either a geography or a property type, and then you're going to get some effect for the age of the property, the size of the property, the condition of the property, et cetera. Philadelphia's assessment process works like this particular graphic that has 6 boxes across with those arrows essentially showing that this is going on all the time. You are doing work to ensure that you can have good, accurate data going into the models. You are validating the sales to ensure that they are, in fact, real arm's length sales and representative of the properties that sold. You are doing statistical model development. You are looking at the results and taking a look at the quality measures of the results. You're doing final quality control review, and then you certify the values, and that's what your taxpayers will see. Now, they're not just sort of doing this on their own. There are industry standards. There is an entity known as the International Association of Assessing Officers, or IAAO. They have standards for everything. They have standards for how to value property, how to create these automated value models, how to understand what the quality of the data is to ensure that it is good data creating accurate values, on the process itself, on tax policy, on ratio studies, which are how you determine the accuracy and uniformity of your assessments. There are standards for everything, and those standards, when followed, generally, I think are conducive to ending up with good values. So what is assessment quality? There are generally considered to be 3 measures of that. The assessment ratio, which I think is the one that many people are familiar with, and that is essentially how closely does the assessed value represent the actual value of the property or the sale price of the property. In Philadelphia, after a movement to something we call the actual value initiative, we are sort of getting right very, very close to 1. So the sale price and the assessed value are virtually identical. Small variations, plus or minus, but that's where we are. You all are a good bit off of that because you haven't assessed in quite some time. There's also something known as the coefficient of dispersion. That's the industry's statistical measure to talk about uniformity. And you have a right to uniformity. It's written into the Pennsylvania Constitution, if you're a taxpayer, that properties, both by category and assessment, should have similar values if they are similarly valued properties. And that's what the coefficient of dispersion gets at. You will see some numbers on some of these slides. You should know that the industry standard for a coefficient of dispersion is under 15. So if you're under 15, you're within the tolerance that the industry suggests is good. And if you're over 15, that means there's a manifest lack of uniformity. In other words, you and your neighbor might well have similarly valued properties, but one assessment's different than the other. And that's what the coefficient of dispersion gets at. There's also one called the price-related differential, or PRD. That's a measure of what's known as vertical equity. So in other words, what you're looking at is the notion that whether or not you have a lower-priced property or a higher-priced property, the assessments should be a similar percentage of the value of that property. So if you have a $100,000 house and your typical assessment is at 65%, it should be $65,000. And if you have a $1 million house, it should be $650,000. That would be manifest of vertical equity. But if the $100,000 house is valued at $90,000 and the $1 million house is valued at $500,000, that's what's known as regressive because those ratios are different and they go down, advantaging the higher value properties in that second example. Okay? And that's what, that should be between 0.98 and 1.03 by industry standard. The little table at the bottom here points out to you that by way of that median ratio, you all are sitting in that 50 to 60 range, 0.5 to 0.6 range, and that's evidence, really, quite frankly, of the fact there just hasn't been an assessment for a very long time, and properties have gotten higher in terms of their value over time. The CODs, or the coefficient of dispersions, are all over 15, which means that there's a manifest lack of uniformity across those assessments. And the PRDs actually are reasonably close or a smidge above where you should be ideally in terms of the standards that are set by the industry. One of the things that we pointed out in our report that I believe you all have access to, is that we believe that by virtue of some of the appeals that are done, particularly on the higher priced properties, those are actually reducing some of the regressivity that you might otherwise see were it not for those appeals. Because in the main, appeals aren't being done on very low priced properties. There's, the cost of the appeal is high, and initiated by a governmental entity. That is, the cost is high and the return is relatively low. But if you appeal on $1 million property, a $5 million property, even if it costs several $1,000s to effectuate that appeal, you'll get it back in the taxes. So we think actually that that has reduced some of the regressivity in the county. And so why do we care about uniformity and vertical equity? You care about them because it's the law, and that's a good reason to care about it. They need to be uniform by law. And regressivity is really just an issue of fundamental fairness. And I think if I learned one thing in doing this work over the years is that no matter what you do by way of assessments, you will make mistakes. But the expectation needs to be that those mistakes are small and random. In other words, a few $1,000s plus or minus, but not sort of more on the low price property or the high price property, or not more in one place than another. You're going to make some errors in these statistical models. That's the way those models work. There's actually an error term built into the statistical models. But the idea is those errors that you make in the assessment should be small and random, and then a lot of correction occurs through the appeals process. And actually, the appeals process is also important because what it does is it corrects the data for the next assessment. So I'm going to try and speed through some of this, and that is in terms of a reassessment does not necessarily equate to higher taxes. Some people talk about a reassessment as a rebalancing, right? Because the idea is your task at hand is figuring out the value of the property. It's the aggregate value of the property against which a millage rate is attached that will yield a certain tax haul to the various governmental entities around the county. And so what you're doing with the reassessment is really just, truing up the values to what the true values are. The governments do, in fact, need money to do the things that they do, like police and educate and fix streets and all those other things. So it really is incumbent, as long as we have a system that's based in the valuation of the taxes, to make sure that those valuations are accurate. And the other thing, and it was pointed out earlier on, that in a reassessment, and this I think mitigates to the concept that a reassessment doesn't necessarily mean higher taxes, is that there is an anti-windfall provision, so a county can't reassess and pull in a lot more tax as a function of that. There would need to be a readjustment of the millage. That doesn't mean that any given taxpayer wouldn't pay more or a little bit less, depending upon whether or not, in fact, that they've been overpaying or underpaying throughout the pendency since the last assessment. This particular image I really like because it does a really good job making that point, and it comes from North Carolina. And basically what it's showing you is if you think about the house on the left, it was valued at $200,000 in 2023. In this particular county, Wake County, property valuations increased about 41%. And if you look at the top house, excuse me, that top house is valued at $350,000 in 2024. That property went up 75%. So in light of the overall 41%, it's likely that that property will see a tax increase. And it should, because its value is much higher. If you move to the middle house on the right, the one that's valued at $300,000, that's up 50%. So that's just a little bit more than the 41% overall increase. The expectation is that that particular property might just see a small increase. Then you look at the property at the bottom valued at $250,000. That's actually up 25% since the prior valuation of it. But because it's below that 41%, it's likely to see a tax decrease because it didn't go up as quickly in value as the overall average. And this, I think, does a good job sort of exemplifying that point that in a reassessment, not everybody's taxes go up because you're reassessing. Some will go up, some will go down. You're really just truing it up to what's happening to the value of property across the geography that you're evaluating. There are some complications, like, for example, in this particular county, you have a lot of commercial property. That commercial property has seen some differential changes in their values, some well-publicized reductions in values on commercial properties. So that will get sort of estimated into what the tax haul is and may actually yield require a higher millage to sort of yield as much out of the residential portion. But as of 2023, the commercial property valuation as a percentage of all valuation in the county is not terribly different than it was several years ago. Almost done here. This is a map of Allegheny County. The map is colored by the assessment ratio. The purple tones are places where that assessment ratio is low. The orange and brown tones are where those assessment ratios are high. You'll notice that there really is a concentration of those lower assessment ratios in the city of Pittsburgh, and less so in the communities that surround within Allegheny County. Here's a closer up look inside of the city of Pittsburgh, and as I said, you can see that there are a number of places that are working with assessment ratios in the 30, 40, 50% range. The next two maps, Allegheny County and Pittsburgh again, are looking at the percentage of properties whose valuation is below the common level ratio. You can expect that where that percentage is high, there are a number of properties that may well see an increase, and where it is low, you'll see a smaller number of properties, if any, that could see an increase. Some may actually see a decrease. And again, those are going to be concentrated with these darker brown tones in this in the city of Pittsburgh, where high percentages of the properties are valued below the common level ratio. So our take on this is that a lot of the increases of taxes will be more heavily concentrated in the city of Pittsburgh than in other parts of the county. It won't be exclusively there, but it will be there. So will taxes go up? As I said before, under a good, fair valuation, it's likely that some will go up, some will go down, and some will stay the same. The senator had mentioned a 33, 33, 33 thing. It's hard to know after 12 or 13 years of revaluation whether or not those percentages are exactly accurate. But again, it is likely, it is more than likely, it is very likely that some will go up, some will go down, and some will stay the same. It's just hard to know the exact percentage. And I do think that it is, fair to say that some will feel some pain, and that's where jurisdictions have the ability to to implement things like homestead exemptions or loops or, you know, other kinds of tax intervention strategies that are designed to ease the pain of those changes in assessments. And those are super important, but that should not be what determines what the valuations are. The valuations still need to be accurate. And we did a little bit of a take as in the work that the Heinz Endowment's funded for us on this project, and we took a look at where the propensity to find higher levels of properties valued below the common level ratio, and we sorted them out by the income decile of the census tract within which they're located. And what we observed is that those properties below the common level ratio are going to be more clustered in the areas that are sort of in that lower to modest income range. And so that means that if there are to be things put in place that are designed to sort of moderate the impact of those assessment increases in terms of the taxes people pay, being able to sort of target it geographically or economically to that group of homeowners, that lower to modest income group of homeowners, is where it would make all kinds of sense. And that's good because there are provisions already within state law to be able to have certain kinds of targeting for these tax advantages, like for very low income people. So what can the government do to protect people from rising taxes? I do think that an educated set of residents, homeowners in the city of Pittsburgh and throughout Allegheny County is really important to make sure that they both understand how this is done, what's happening, how to effectuate appeals, how to ensure that what they're paying is a fair amount. I do think that people tend to want to pay a fair amount, even if they can't afford it and they know that the municipalities and the other governing bodies are there to try and help them out. I think that people generally understand that this is how things that we all value are paid for, firstly. Secondly, the things that you put in place need to be affirmatively marketed. So just saying that there's a homestead exemption, that's terrific. But better is for municipalities, better for the county, better for community-based organizations to affirmatively let people know and understand what these things are, that they're safe, that they're designed to help them moderate the impact of their property taxes and make them more affordable for them. All too often we observe in Philadelphia, we enact these things related to property taxes, and sometimes you get, you know, maybe 20, 30% uptake on it, even though it was designed to help the homeowners. So my sense is affirmatively market these things so that people avail themselves of the wonderful tools that the governing bodies are making available to them. Assuming that an assessment is going to be done at some point, it's really important to ensure that whoever is selected to do it does a high-quality job by all the measurements that I expressed to you, that it's a transparent process so homeowners understand how it is that these assessments are being made, and that it's verifiably accurate, and also that it is done, particularly a first time when it hasn't been done in a very long time, with ample time to get feedback from homeowners about whether or not their property has been described properly and therefore valued properly. If they have 2 bedrooms and the administrative data says they have 4, and if their house is 2,000 square feet and the administrative data says 20,000 square feet, their valuation is going to be wrong. They need to have an opportunity to get in before they get a tax bill that sort of stops the heart, you know? Let the reassessment be done with ample time for there to be that sort of feedback loop from the homeowners. You also ought to evaluate whether or not those assessments are creating any biases in terms of, remember I said errors should be small and random. They should not be connected to the racial or ethnic composition of a neighborhood. They should not be connected to the economic profile of the neighborhood. They should be small and random. And a test of that should be done. who's ever doing these assessments or whoever you want to do that test, you should be doing it because there are ways essentially of re-looking at the equations to produce equally accurate but unbiased estimates should there be biased estimates. Lastly, in terms of the tools, the homestead exemptions, those are the ones that we really favored in our report because they are so straightforward. If you own your home and you've been in your home for a certain amount of time, you sign up for it, you get it, it stays in place until something significant happens. It's very transparent, it's very understandable. Right now, Philadelphia, I believe, is up to about $100,000 off the top value, and that is for all homeowners regardless of their income. Now, if your home isn't valued at $100,000, you don't get the $100,000 homestead exemption. You only get it to the maximum value of the property. And so we like that. It's just so easy to understand and simple to implement, quite frankly. And it's a progressive form of relief. And by that, I don't mean politically progressive, I mean economically progressive. So what that means is essentially that $1 million property owner, they're going to get the $100,000, but it probably represents, in some ways, less financial import to them than somebody who's got the $150,000 and who will now be taxed only on $50,000. And so in some ways it sort of proportionately works out to more. It's almost like the graduated income tax. People talk about that as being progressive. This is not graduated per se, but it functions in a similar way. A loop plan is a good idea. People sometimes have difficulty even if their properties have, in fact, increased well above the average, they may have troubles meeting their tax obligations. Just because their properties are worth more doesn't mean that their income is higher. And a loop kind of program can be helpful there. Payment plans, making sure that people get the exemptions to which they're entitled, like seniors and disabled veterans. Freezes we don't particularly like because they end up costing you a lot of money. I know that there are complications in state law that sort of require freezes make freezes easier than sort of graduated kinds of changes. But we do think that those really do cost the government more than it probably needs to cost them. And people's incomes, even lower income people, will sometimes see small rises, even if it's with consumer price index. Like people in Social Security even will see a small rise in their income. And they want to be able to contribute to funding everything that their community needs, just like everybody else. And access to a fair and transparent and accessible appeal system. That will yield more fairness in the system and better assessments. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming across the state and being able to, and speaking with us. Dr. Goldstein is a wealth of information, as you guys tell. Apologies for mispronouncing your name earlier. Okay. And so with that, I'll kick it off for questions. We'll start with Willie down here. We'll go down the board, but if there are questions that come up, I know this is the back and forth.
First of all, thanks. It's really like a toolkit for preparing. We haven't done it here in a while, so you bring up to light a lot of things, including education, information, the programs that you mentioned at the end. We probably have a dozen, and I bet you people don't know 90% of them, outside of the homestead. So I think the points that you bring to our attention and make us aware are going to be very helpful for not only the commission but the inevitable, which is going to happen. So thank you. I don't have any questions. Just the data was very, very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Dr. Goldstein. This was a fantastic presentation, very, very informative, lots of good ideas I think we can sink our teeth into. One thing you talked about that I was curious as to the why, when you were presenting the maps, slide 16, 17, for example, I see the data, but do we know why? Why is there that disparity in the median assessment ratio? Like we're seeing it?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things probably going on. Firstly is the the distance of time since a last assessment was done. And I think it's also the fact that real estate markets don't appreciate uniformly across space. And some of the places that you're looking at in purple are areas in Pittsburgh, for example, and I'll go to the Pittsburgh one because that's where we're sitting right this second. Some of those are areas that have seen rapid appreciation over the last several years, like that area up in Lawrenceville or sort of adjacent to the Strip District. Those places have really changed an awful lot, and the assessments have not obviously kept up with them. And so I think that the duration since the last assessment plus the unevenness by which properties have appreciated is what causes those disparities.
Thank you. I'm also curious as to your thoughts on, you talked a little bit about what we need to do leading up to it, but in terms of who does it, do you have thoughts in terms of, whether it's outside entities, whether it's something that should be built into the government in some way, shape, or form eventually, or a combination of the two?
Yeah, I actually think, personal opinion, a combination of the two. I do think that governmental entities, because they're the custodians of some of the really important data, to sort of create that process internally so that those data are thought about not only as, we're going to charge a tax on a recording fee or something else like that, but these are the basic data upon which we are going to make our assessments so that you create those processes internally and keep them fresh and active at all times. And that is across governmental agencies like whoever it is that records your deeds or does your code enforcement, and I know that that happens differentially across the county. So I think that that is important to do as a governmental function. In the city of Philadelphia actually has teams of people who are looking at, for example, properties all the time. They become experts within the geography that they're focused on, whether or not it's one of these things they call GMAs or generalized market areas, I think is what that stands for, or the zones, so the bigger areas within the city. So they become pretty familiar with what homes are selling for, and they can quickly spot homes that are possibly miscoded. They'll even spend time out in the field taking a look at, neighborhoods and properties to, to develop that expertise. And being able to essentially have all that sale data really accurate, I think is a good thing for purposes of the modeling. I do think that it probably, where maybe you want to look to contractors, Philadelphia has some of these folks on staff, and I believe that they also use contractors, is in that statistical modeling and some of the software that they use to do that. You don't want to have to sort of recreate the wheel of the kinds of software that experts use to do this kind of valuation, but fundamentally the engine of that software is that silly little equation that I put up there for you. So I do think it pays to have folks within government do it and sparingly use consultants when necessary.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Goldstein.
Sure.
Dr. Allen, any questions? This is a wealth of information on something we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, really good stuff. A lot to digest for sure, and I think we want to take a closer look at who's going to be affected and be aware of it. And, to give the executive and council a lot of credit, a lot of these things to protect owners from rising taxes have already been put into place. Mm-hmm. Loop is one that's most recently been put in that's going to be very helpful. And I think a full review of the existing exemptions, because there's a lot more than we realize. One that I think of often is the volunteer firefighter exemption, mm-hmm. Which once we give an exemption, the rest of us pay for that. But who is going to argue that the volunteer firefighters aren't deserving of that, or our disabled veterans or our seniors? So I think a full analysis and part of our recommendation could possibly be to make sure we advertise all of these exemptions, or that the county advertises those exemptions when the time comes, but or before that. But it's a lot of good stuff. And one clarification, if you could, for me. you could re-explain vertical equity. And if I'd have paid more attention in stats class, I'd know that off by heart, but I didn't. It was a long time ago, too. So
You should come to my class on Thursday night from 5 to 8.
I think I'd enjoy that.
Well, you'd be the only one. In terms of vertical equity, think about this. You have an array of properties valued from $100,000 to $1 million. Vertical equity says if a property at $100,000 is valued at $80,000, the $1 million property should be valued at $800,000. So each one is 80% of the value of the property. No more, no less, whether or not you're higher or lower. And by the way, that's sort of on average, right? So you will see some fluctuations on that, but small and random. A high price-related differential to measure vertical equity would be one where essentially the $100,000 property, let's say, is valued at 80, but the million, which is 80%, but the $1 million properties are valued at like 600,000 or 60%, so that as you make your way up the value, as you make your way up the value continuum, the percentage of that value that is identified as the assessed value goes down. That would be regressive. Of course, it could be progressive too, which is the $100,000 property is valued at $80,000 and the $1 million property is valued at $1.2 million. That would be a different vertical equity problem. It would be a progressive one, because as you make your way up that value continuum, the percentage is higher. But more typically, what you find is that for a whole host of reasons, higher value properties will be valued at a lower ratio than lower value properties.
And I think the challenge for any contractor, whoever does this for the county, sooner or later, for every single property, is to remain within those guidelines, or not guidelines, but remain within those equitable figures, because you kind of have to do both at the same time. You take a snapshot of the whole county, and then you look at these ratios and how they're affected, and up or down, how they're affected. So that sounds like a real challenge for that.
It is a real challenge. And as I said, there really should be no expectation that anybody, whether or not you do it yourself or a contractor does it, that they're going to get every single one of the several 100,000 properties right. And that's, again, the sort of, there are things in place in terms of the procedures and the processes and the like to increase the likelihood that you get it right. But then also that appeals process, particularly an informal version of it and then a more formal version of it if necessary, because that's where a lot of correction can take place in that appeals process. And one thing you made a comment, you do have a lot of tools in this jurisdiction, and there are provisions even to have more if you wanted. The big complication, I think, is if you look at them, they're not all, they can't be necessarily all layered together. So what it does is it creates the potential of a quandary for a homeowner who might be in a position of having a difficult time trying to figure out, well, am I better with the senior exemption or the low income freeze or the homestead exemption? Because if you can't do all those things, understanding what's best for you might be difficult, particularly somebody who's not super sophisticated around property taxes and things like that. So I do think that, and you never want to take away the volunteer firefighter exemption or anything, it's totally understandable, but trying to simplify the system over time as much as possible so that people can make really good, informed decisions that are good for them and good for the county is best practice.
Thank you, Doctor, for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much. As a math major and as doing statistics for a while, I really enjoyed this. But I won't belabor that because everybody's still awake, and I want to tempt fate here. I did have one question on the regressivity. Just to give the example, you said if $1 million property is valued at $800,000, and then you talked about like a $100,000 property being valued maybe a little bit higher. Who's determining that $1 million property is $1 million property and that we have 800, that you know, that's the thing. It's kind of like a chicken and an egg thing there. It's like, why is it $1 million property and it's now valued at $800,000? That means somebody's valued it at $1 million.
That's right. So in other words, the whole assessment process is taking for granted that the arm's length transaction price is the real price in some way. So that two people unencumbered by anything else enter into an agreement and they say that house is worth $1 million. And that becomes the real price. So what you're trying to do is to take all those arm's length transactions and figure out what goes into their valuation, and that's what you then apply to all properties. And so when you say about whether or not it's the 80,000, the 80,000 on 100 or 800,000 on $1 million, it really should be the same thing in that, there are homes that will transact for 100 or even lower, still in many communities, though $40,000, $30,000, $50,000. We have some of them in Philadelphia. You have some of them throughout some of the municipalities in Allegheny County. So those prices are the prices that you want to model to, as long as you're certain for the modeling purposes that they are, in fact, arm's length, unencumbered transactions.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask, is to make sure that they're not just family transactions or something else that's happening where there's a deal between two folks. So from what I know about Philadelphia, Philadelphia started doing regular assessments over the last decade or so, and it still stands. Philadelphia is still standing. I would love to know some lessons from some lessons about that process, and if you have any lessons about what it took to get the ball moving on recurring reassessments, and any lessons that were learned along the way, because we could probably use those lessons here.
Yeah, I think there are a few lessons. Firstly, the first time is difficult, and disentangling the assessment from people's tax bills is a very difficult thing to do. When Philadelphia went to that actual value initiative as opposed to what we were doing, which was having, an estimation of market value and then an assessment ratio of about a third, people would get their tax bills and they might be up a little bit or down a little bit, but they didn't exactly even know why. There were too many variables, I think, for people to, to fully understand in terms of what their taxes are. So I think that one lesson is the first time is going to be a little more painful than other times. And that is, I do believe, why it's so important to have public education so that people really understand what's happening, as well as, circuit breaker kinds of things to ensure that people are not put out of their homes as a result of an inability to pay their taxes, and things like a homestead, a loop, a payment plan, et cetera. Those things help. I do think in some sense, and this came up in some of the questions of Senator Fontana about what is the proper cycle for doing this. In the ideal world, it might be, every year or two. And he mentioned the 5-year on the bill that the Senate bill that 567, if I caught the number correctly, about 5 years. I think probably with the velocity by which property values change, probably a 3-year time is kind of ideal. And I say that because while you might like to see it shorter in some sense to capture the fluctuations of the market, the process is sufficiently long and complex, and you need time for appeals to make their way into the system and through the system to be able to sort of make sure that your data with the next revaluation is accurate. And so I do think that we learned in Philadelphia that about a 3-year valuation, about a 3-year cycle. I'm not sure if our Office of Property Assessment would 100% agree with me, but I believe my estimation that it's probably about 3 years. And I do think that we've learned a lot around having that, what I described as the informal review process. So not requiring people to have to file with our Board of Revision of Taxes, which is where the serious is not the right word, but the more challenging kinds of appeals go, and then I guess off to court potentially after that. But they set up a first-level review, which is with the Office of Property Assessment itself. So if you are able to go in there and say, hey, listen, I know that you said my house is worth this, but you describe my property as this size, you describe my lot as that size, and those things are all wrong. I don't have air conditioning, I haven't updated my kitchen, or whatever the kinds of things are. And, you show up there with some pictures, perhaps even somebody from the Office of Property Assessment will go out and do some verification of your representation to them. And if it's accurate, they can make adjustments right there. So being able to have the less kind of publicly scary, the more informal process, I think is a really good one, both for ensuring good valuations going forward and ensuring that people who really need to have some adjustment made because of an inaccuracy can get that done. So those are a couple of the lessons.
Great. And then from a cost perspective, one thing that I I think this is even if we all think that assessments should take place, I think cost is the one that we're all staring at. Yeah. You mentioned aerial imagery. I don't know if LiDAR is being used or anything like that. I'm assuming it's the one and the same. I would love to know just a little bit more how Philadelphia accounted for the cost aspect of this to get this started, and how, if you could speak to that at all.
I can't speak to it too much, but I'd be happy to make a connection for you and get you some details, perhaps with the gentleman who runs our Office of Property Assessment. But when I heard earlier this concept of a small fee per property, which is not an overwhelming fee, $20 a parcel, that would go pretty far, I think, probably to underwriting the cost of this first one, certainly. But yes, Philadelphia spends a lot of money. It is a reasonably large staff of full-time people who are doing things that are necessary to ensure that we have accurate assessments. And even with that, there are issues. So.
Thank you. And then my last question, everybody here will be tired of hearing about the land value tax. But I know that I think from previous conversations that Philadelphia had some trouble pursuing a land value tax. I didn't know if there was any information on that. That's something that is always brought up here, and if Philadelphia looked into that and what may have come from that.
Sure. I would say that the interest in Philadelphia's valuation of land separately from building, at least in the last couple of years, has been more focused on making sure that properties that got the new construction abatement were properly taxed, because our new construction abatement attaches to the improvement, the home, not the land. And so our Office of Property Assessments, as I understand it, went down the path of trying to properly value that land, because even though you couldn't up the assessment on the property, if the land got more expensive because everything around it got more expensive, you should be able to capture that value. And I'm told from people inside of the Office of Property Assessment that it was really, really difficult to value that land properly. And at some point, they just sort of abandoned the idea of doing it, and they value the entire property and just have a ratio that they apply to, to land and building. I do think, part of the challenge is in a place like Philadelphia, we might have 30,000 homes transact in a year, in an active year. You will only have a very small fractional number of just bare parcels transacting, and then knowing that parcel, knowing where it is one thing, but knowing if there's an oil tank in the ground, which could, dramatically influence its value to anybody who buys it, that's really hard to know. And so I think that it's just very difficult to do. The concept of it, though, I think makes an awful lot of sense because of the ancillary benefits that attach to being able to value that land.
That's helpful, because I think one of the, land value tax makes a lot of sense in many ways for making the land, or making the land more usable, or providing benefits to make productive land. But at the same time, I think the cost argument is a little bit more muddy, where it could be more expensive or less expensive to actually value things by land. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
Pass it on. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. Great information that you're presenting. I know one of the things that is out there that many are concerned about is how property assessment can impact things like gentrification and those kind of things in communities. You did list out a number of tools that communities and individuals can use to kind of protect themselves. What have you found to be the most effective way to really promote engagement of these tools and resources to prevent those kinds of things where people are losing their homes, particularly if it's a wider effect? If it's certainly it's always impactful if it's an individual, but certainly if there's a broader community that's being impacted in a disproportionate way. What have you seen in Philadelphia or other counties that have been effective solutions for kind of countering that impact?
Sure. So let's talk about, a set of solutions that involves people who are living in neighborhoods like the ones you described and availing themselves of the benefits that, exist through one tool or another. So Philadelphia has done, I think, a really good proactive job about getting entities out there like our legal services groups or our local neighborhood assistance groups or NACs to be able to, work with homeowners like right in the neighborhood and help them understand what they need to understand to access the tools that are available to them. In terms of things that work better, I personally favor tax policies that would allow property values to go up slowly even if you lived in a gentrifying or rapidly appreciating area. Why? Because communities need those revenues to educate their children and protect the citizenry and put out fires and, take care of the parks and rec centers and all those other things that we all really want. And freezing taxes in areas as you described, it takes away some of that revenue. Whereas if somebody knew with some certainty that their taxes might go up next year, but they can't go up more than 2% or 3% or some manageable number, what that does is it continues to bring in that revenue that communities need to do what they need to do without overburdening somebody who can't afford to pay. And people who write about with expertise in this field of taxing and property assessments and the like, they talk about the importance of the predictability of one's assessment. And so knowing that worst case scenario, my $300 bill can be $310 next year, that I can live with. But it couldn't go from $300 to $3,000, and that I can't live with. So being able to give people that certainty. The challenge with the policy that I prefer, which is to allow these things to go up slowly, is that under state law, we don't seem to have a way of doing that. That some have argued that it could run afoul of uniformity because somebody might be sort of capturing 100% of the increase and somebody might only be capturing a small percentage of their increase. And so that some people deem as violative of the state constitution. But I do think that, if you talk to state legislators and the like, they sort of get that and wish there was an opening to be able to do that. I know that, I think it was Representative Solomon had created something maybe 2 years ago about a freeze, and I talked to him about it. And, I think he was quite receptive to the notion of, letting things go up more slowly, but the problem was the legal limitations that were placed on it, so which is why we have freezes rather than small increases. Got it.
Would you find that as it relates to like a county like Philadelphia who's doing regular assessments, there's less of an impact than, for example, in other parts of the state, including Allegheny County, where it's not as regular, that there's more of a risk in that case versus if you're doing regular assessments.
I do think that that is true, yes, because, in a rapidly changing market, and I don't mean one that's falling, but we're in the scenario of appreciating markets, the ability to sort of grab those values in smaller time intervals really in some ways shields people a little bit from that big jump. Now, the flip side is, one could argue that some are underpaying during that period of time that the assessment has occurred, between assessments, excuse me. But still, no, I think more regular assessments makes better sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ira. And disclosure for the public, I work for the Heinz Endowments, and I worked on the grant to the reinvestment fund to support this work back in 2023 and 2024. The reason we did that is to be able to have conversations like the one we're having today so that decision makers can make informed choices about these policies, about who's going to be impacted, and hopefully mitigate that. Just one more question for you. One of our tasks of this body is to make recommendations to the county executive and county council. Curious if you think there is a best-in-class state or county out there, whether it's Philly, whether it's a different state, that you think is doing this extremely well and that we could learn from. We've looked at Maryland's system a little bit. That one seems rational and strong, but just curious if you have other ideas of what we should be looking at as we're crafting our recommendation.
I think I was going to mention Maryland, because I do think that, they do have some really good approaches to this, and certainly the sort of rotating assessment getting you throughout the state on a regular and recurring basis, I think really is a good thing to do. There are other, some other jurisdictions that I think do good jobs on different things. Like, for example, I've seen some really interesting stuff from the Chicago assessor around public education and public awareness campaigns and things like that. It's actually like a big initiative of theirs. So I do think that we could, and I can sort of take it back and think about it, like what are a good set of, if we think about the components here, who's got best in class on each of the components? Like I say, some of them are going to be just legally limited on things, but I do think, Maryland and Chicago come to mind right away. Sure.
Are there any follow-up questions? Okay. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. I think that was extremely informative, and if we have any other questions, are you available to field them?
Totally.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Doctor. All right, so moving to the rest of the agenda, which will be less interesting. But the next on the agenda is updates on the work streams. We have two ongoing work streams right now. The first is the review of past GRCs. That's being led by Gretchen right now. Gretchen, do you want to give an update, or I can?
Yeah, maybe we can do a combo update. So, I understand that the law students are pretty well, they might be done, I would say, with the quantitative work, meaning like listing the recommendations and the status of what happened to them or not, whether there was any action. And I think we're about to get into more qualitative work, which is to understand the why. So if something wasn't acted upon or wasn't considered or was considered and failed, just to get a little qualitative information about that, which would be vis-a-vis interviews. So we're thinking right now about who are the right folks to interview, just to get our hands around the why. So I think that's the next step.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. That's all we have. So I think the next steps will be putting together a list of interviewees, and we're working with the solicitor's office and Alex Inman on getting that there. So thank you. Okay. The next work stream is the literature review for the subcommittees. Our Heinz students are working on that, putting together the literature reviews for each of the modules that we're looking at each of the subcommittees. So I think that's ongoing. I don't think there's anything else to mention there. Great. From a committee update perspective, I will provide just kind of quick updates for everybody here. We have 3 subcommittees. The first one is the subcommittee on property assessments. That is reviews how property assessments are done, considering reassessment schedules, fairness, accuracy, and transparency, and examines reforms to improve trust and equity. That is comprised of all commissioners. So and so we handle a lot of the business here. As you see, we are going to, we've met with a lot of folks about and collected information. We're probably going to start the deliberation phase of what recommendations we want to make, given the wealth of information that we have received. The next subcommittee is the Structure of Government Committee, which reviews the county government bodies, rules, and institutions, focusing on how power, accountability, and decisions support service under the Home Rule Charter. That committee met a couple of weeks ago, and we received a very interesting, really interesting presentation on voluntary disincorporation of municipalities from Senator Piscitano and Representative Kincaid's policy teams, and a bill that is advancing through the State House and Senate on how municipalities can voluntarily disincorporate. An emphasis on voluntary. I've been told to put say it every time, voluntary. So, and then there will be a meeting coming up. I think will be scheduled for in the next over the next month regarding some of the other things that are coming up regarding term limits. Some of the democratic rules that on council and campaign finance and a couple other things, redistricting of jailed of inmates, things like that. And then the last subcommittee is the Role of Government Committee. It examines county services, their funding, and whether delivery methods meet community needs fairly, efficiently, and sustainably. We are scheduling that meeting, and so we'll be working with Ernest to get that scheduled as soon as possible. As for next steps in future meetings, we have exhausted all the ones that are on the calendar right now. So expect, I guess, polls for and scheduling invites for the next meetings. We'll be scheduling out the next block, probably the next 3 months going forward. With that, are there any questions, or can I get a motion to adjourn? Oh, actually, sorry. Before I adjourn, I'm sorry, I forgot. Is there any public comment?
No public comment?
Okay, I see. I thought that might be the case. All right, with that, can I have a motion to adjourn? Second. All right, all in favor? Aye. All right. Meeting